Hello and welcome to session 5 of the MMO development class. So I guess what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be taking a look at cleaning up some of our client code that we wrote last week. Now there's two very big problems with the way the code's set up right now, and I want to get those problems completely solved so that we can actually build the game. I know every week it's been like, oh yeah, we'll just get this done and we'll build the game. Oh yeah, we'll just get this done. But you know, that's kind of the approach that I wanted in the first place, is to identify issues, things that we can abstract, and then do that, and then build on top of those abstractions and so on. So because the classes have been limited to 2 hours for the last 5 weeks, it's unfortunately taken longer than I expected. But don't worry, we are going to do some fun stuff this week that will pretty much get us on track. So if everybody's ready, I am going to off-screen switch my branch over because I'm on a different branch. Master. Okay, so I switched my local branch over and we can go ahead and get started. So I'm going to go ahead and fire up RuneSlinger, and let's take a look at some of the stuff that we're going to need to do. So I said that we're going to be focusing on, oh, hold on, I should probably bring my Solution Explorer over for you guys. I usually do that before class, but whatever. Okay, so close you guys. So one of the problems, we have two big problems right now. The first big problem is that our network manager only supports receiving one or dispatching a single command at a time, because we have this command callback field that's set to whatever it needs to call back. That's not very good design. If we dispatch two commands at the same time, we will get basically undefined results, which isn't good. I just kind of threw this together last week just to get things going and get an idea and a feel for how I wanted the API to look. And I'm very happy with the way the API looks for the most part. And by API, I mean I'm very happy with the way this code looks. It's nice. It basically gets rid of a bunch of complexity that you would normally have to worry about, and makes it so you can deal with commands and responses to the commands and errors on commands in a very straightforward way that makes a lot of sense when reading it. But the underlying code has problems. So that's what we're going to be fixing first. We're going to be making it so that we can dispatch multiple commands to the server at a single time without causing unpredictable results. Because unpredictable results are bad. The next thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be fixing up our event handling. So right now our event handling is very straightforward. Our network manager receives an event from the server, deserializes it, and then publishes it to the game manager. Now this isn't a very good, effective way of doing this, because we want, depending on what state our game is in, we may have some event handlers that are appropriate, some event handlers that aren't as appropriate, and so on and so on. So we want to be able to come up with a very clean way to handle the concept of events. And that's what we're going to be working on next. We got a question. Are we going to pull out some of the framework code client-side into its own project? Not yet, but we will be at some point. We will be when we start writing, when we get to the point where we're starting to write more game logic than framework logic. That would be an appropriate time to switch over into using a different assembly for our framework logic. But right now our game logic is very tightly coupled to our framework logic based off, because of the nature of how we're developing this. Like I said, this is not a waterfall approach of development. This is a very organic approach. So until we get to the point where we're writing more game logic than framework logic, I want to keep everything as closely coupled as possible as far as where the code is. And the reason for that is that I don't want to lock myself into a position where, oh, I didn't know that this part had to be in the framework, or I didn't know this part had to be in the game logic. I don't want to think about which parts need to talk to each other until we have something working, and then we can take a look at, okay, so what parts need to talk to each other, what parts can be moved into a different project, what parts need to be in the same project, do we need to introduce more abstractions in order to handle this, so that when we get our framework assembly decoupled from our game logic assembly, we won't have unnecessary abstractions or anything like that. So we're very much tailoring all of this framework code specifically to this project, as to simplify the way we're writing this code and to make sure that we don't end up with stuff that we don't need or additional complexity that we don't want. So I hope that makes sense to everyone. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at how we can make our network manager a little bit nicer as far as dispatching commands. The simplest way that I came up with to do this is on every command that's sent to the server, we give that command a unique identifier, and then when the server sends a response, it uses that same identifier. So let's write the server-side code for that first, because the server-side code is going to be very simple. What we need is two additional parameters. We need a parameter on our Rune operation code parameter enumeration in order to send the command ID from the client to the server. So let's go ahead and put that guy in our enumeration. And then on our Rune operation response parameter, we need to be able to pass back the command ID from the server to the client. So we decided a command ID to our operation code and our operation response parameter enumerations. After that, the code to actually send an ID from the server to the client is incredibly simple. We don't care what type of ID, what kind of data the ID contains. It could be a string, a byte array, an int, whatever. We don't really care. All we need to do is at the beginning of our operation request, we need to extract out our command ID. So we've extracted out our command ID from the request from the client. And keep in mind, though, I am writing code in such a way that it'll throw an exception if this parameter isn't present. That is on purpose, because if this throws an exception, it'll proc this try block, which will be caught, and so on and so on. So I am intentionally writing this code in such a way that it will throw an exception if the client sends a malformed request to the server. So now we've extracted the command ID. We now need to send the command ID back to the client in the form of this parameters array. So if you guys recall, this parameters array dictionary is what's sent back to the client. So all I need to do is do parameters byte Rune operation response parameter dot command ID equals command ID. And that's it. The command ID is just an object that's extracted and then sent back. So that's how we're going to know which command was sent out and all of that fun stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and hit F6, wait for my application to start, and it started. And then I'm going to jump back into the client. Now the client, what we're going to need to do is I'm going to go ahead and write out a dictionary of type GUID and action of operation response. I'm going to call this dictionary command callbacks. This dictionary is going to contain delegates that will be invoked when a particular command or command response is received based off of GUID. The reason I'm using a GUID here is because it's the easiest way to get something that's globally unique. It is only 16 bytes to compare, so it is fairly, because we're not going to be representing this as a string or anything like that, it's very quick to compare and makes our logic a lot simpler. If we run into a situation where the client is sending so many commands to the server that the GUID itself is causing a performance bottleneck, which is unlikely, we can switch over to using like a uint or a different mechanism to store our command callbacks. But for now, we're going to use a GUID. In the future, we could revisit this and change it to something more complex, but the interest of simplicity, I'm going to keep this, well, simple. So what I'm going to do is then I'm going to delete this command callback field. What that's going to do is it's going to give me a nice little roadmap of everywhere that I have to go through in order to change the code. So now I have a bunch of red in this file. Like I said, that's just a nice little roadmap to tell me where I have to change the code to work with this new command callbacks dictionary. And then, of course, because this is a dictionary, I am going to need to instantiate it. And just because I can, I'm going to make these read-only, or I can't make these read-only because that's not a constructor, derp. So, command callbacks is being instantiated. I'm actually going to instantiate it before the Photon peer. It's probably not going to make a difference, but it makes more sense to me just because things and words and stuff. I just want to do it this way. It feels nicer to have this class ready to work before we actually go about instantiating the Photon peer. And in the interest of that, I'm going to move the JSON serializer up here too. So now we have two methods that we need to fix. Well, actually three. We need to fix our dispatch when we do not expect a response, and our dispatch when we do expect a response, and then we need to change our onOperationResponse method, which, if you recall, is invoked by Photon, to invoke the appropriate handler. Let's do that one first. That's going to be very easy. So instead of doing command callback operation response parameters, I'm going to first extract the command ID. Now, this does warrant a slight discussion about how we're going to pass the GUID from the client to the server and from the server to the client. I'm going to pass it as a byte array. Because Photon itself does not know how to deserialize or serialize a GUID, we need to do our own custom logic. So fortunately, it's very easy to go from and to a byte array with a GUID. So I can simply say var command ID equals new GUID, and then all I have to do is pass in a byte array, as you see in its second constructor, that will constitute the information inside of this value object. So then I'm going to say byte array, so I'm casting to a byte array, operation response dot parameters byte rune operation response parameter dot command ID. So all we're doing is we're extracting what was sent from the server to the client. Then I'm going to say command callbacks at command ID invoke with operation response. And I can do that. I can use this syntax right here because what's actually being passed, or what's actually being returned by this expression, is a delegate. So I can simply use the parenthesis operator here to invoke that delegate. This code is the same thing as doing .invoke at operation response. But we don't need to write invoke because the C# compiler takes care of that for us. The final thing is I'm going to actually remove the command. After we have already processed the command callback, I'm going to remove it from our dictionary. So that's our onOperationResponse. So let's go ahead and rewrite my dispatch method that does not expect a response item, because this will be simpler than the second dispatch method. So to do that, instead of doing command callback equals, which no longer exists, I'm going to do command callbacks.add GUID.newGUID, which I'm actually going to say command ID. And then I'm going to do server response goes into Okay, so all I'm doing here is I'm adding a delegate to my dictionary using a command ID as the key, and the key is simply a random, well, not a random, GUIDs aren't random, they are a generated GUID. So now what I need to do is, the first thing is I need to extract out my property errors. Now I'm going to clean this code up a little bit. I'm not very happy with looking at this code the way it is currently written. It's way too big of an expression with too many genericness. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say var property errors equals this. So we get our property errors out, and then I'm going to say var operation errors equals, and then I'm going to extract and deserialize our operation errors. Oh, shut up. Silence. There you go. And then I'm going to fix that spelling mistake right there. And then I'm going to invoke the action with a new command context of property errors and operation errors. So to somebody who doesn't really know C# very well, this might look a little bit confusing, but just to break it down for you guys, what we're doing here is we're hoisting up whatever delegate was invoked, or whatever delegate was passed into the dispatch. Now keep in mind, for example, our send message, I believe it was, send message. What did I call that guy? Send lobby message. There we go. So this is the delegate that was passed into this dispatch method. And what I'm doing is I'm hoisting that delegate into another delegate, and then I'm setting the delegate that's hoisting that delegate into a dictionary that's going to be later invoked. Now the final thing that I need to do is I need to pass the command ID to the server, because right now we're not passing the command ID to the server, but we need to in order for us to extract the command ID back out. So to do that, I'm going to change the signature of my dispatch internal method to accept a GUID called command ID. So all I did was I added a argument command ID to this method invocation. Then I'm going to hit Alt Enter Enter. Alt Enter Down Enter. And what that's going to do is it's going to do two things. First of all, it's going to update my dispatch internal signature to accept a GUID command ID. And then next up, it's going to look for every other invocation of dispatch internal and add a little to-do there, because we're not currently passing that argument into our second invocation of dispatch internal. So in the interest of keeping on track here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to implement the dispatch internal method now. Now the only change we're going to have to make here is we're going to have to pass in our command ID into our thing. However, I can't just do this. The reason I can't do this is Photon will choke on a GUID. So like I said before, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do .2byte array. And that'll convert the GUID into a byte array, which will be passed to the server, which will then be passed back to the client, which will then be extracted here, and then our appropriate command callback will be invoked. And then in the interest of memory management, we'll remove our handler, which will remove a reference to the delegate that's hoisting the delegate. So all those delegates will be collected by the garbage collector. So that's about it. That's our new implementation of the first dispatch method. The second dispatch method is going to be a little bit more complex. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to keep the old code down here and I'm going to write the new code on top. First thing we need is a GUID for our command ID. Second thing we need to do is add a delegate to our dictionary. And then the last thing I need to do is extract our parameters dictionary. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy and paste all this code into this. And it should mostly just work, except for the spelling mistake. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to hit Alt Enter, Up Enter, and change that to parameters. So that just fixed that spelling mistake for me. The final thing I'm going to do is delete this old command callback equals and update my dispatch internal method invocation to pass in my command ID. So now our code handles multiple responses. The last thing I want to do as far as command dispatching is I want to introduce one more overload to dispatch. Now the overload to dispatch that I want to introduce is going to be just like this, except for it's not going to accept a delegate. Those are just for commands that you don't care about the response to at all. So we'll have a total of 3 overloads of dispatch. So I'm going to go ahead and implement. And I'm not copying and pasting for a reason here. I just want this to be as clear as possible for everyone. And maybe even if anybody is getting confused about this code, maybe even typing it out again will help you solidify some stuff. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say command ID equals GUID.newGUID. I'm going to say command callbacks. Actually, I'm not going to do any command callbacks. I'm just going to say dispatch internal. And I can just go ahead and inline this variable. So that's it. We have 3 overloads. One that doesn't care about the response, one that cares about getting errors back, and one that cares about getting errors back and a custom response DTO. So it's just 3 methods of dispatch that have varying levels of complexity. So now what I can do is, in the case where we don't care about receiving errors or anything, I can just delete that second parameter or second argument. And now our send lobby message command boils down to this, which is probably the simplest way that you could write this code possible. Like I can't imagine any other framework of code that could make writing this particular line any easier. So now, because I don't have any sort of automated testing going, because I'm a horrible, horrible person, I'm going to jump into Unity and see if this works. Alright, so I'm going to hit Control B. To bring up this guy, and let's see if he works. So I'm going to log in with nelson2@3dbuzz.com with the password of test, and we're logged in, so that's cool. Then let's go ahead and log in with the Unity editor. I believe I did a nelson10@3dbuzz.com as well, and I did. And hey, look, it works. Blah 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 blah. So that's the first step. I'm going to go ahead and do a commit real fast. I'm not going to do a push, I'm just going to do a commit. Finished refactoring command handling to accept multiple commands at once. Added simpler overload to dispatch method. Alright, so I just committed that code. And let's move on to something else. So the next thing that I want to do, now that we've gotten our dispatching working pretty well, what about our commands dispatching themselves? I don't know what you mean by that. Oh, I don't like that very much. The proposed API in the chat right now is something like this. I guess that is a little bit nicer, but I just don't like it. And the reason I don't like it is because it would require that we had some sort of public static registry containing our network manager, and it would couple our commands to the way in which we dispatch commands unless we introduce dependency injection. So yeah, it would be difficult. Yeah, I guess an extension method that relied on static. Yeah. Fine, you win. Okay. But anyway, I'm going to keep it like this because this is pretty, like, everybody agrees that this is pretty straightforward, right? So now that we've gotten our command stuff working, let's go ahead and fix up our events a little bit. Right now, the way that we're doing events is that we are simply testing them manually by type. That's kind of gross. What I want to do instead is I want to introduce a way to handle events similarly to how we handle commands. So if you guys recall, I have my command handlers that implement an interface of the command that they are responsible for. So in this case, what I need to do is I need to basically make an iEvent handler that is very similar in structure to this interface. And that's actually something that's very simple to do. I'm going to do this inside of the client, because as far as I can see, there isn't a need to have this particular interface be on the server yet. Maybe there will be in the future, and if there is, we'll move it. But again, that's the sort of the philosophy that I'm kind of working or viewing this project through in order to make our framework as lean as possible without creating unnecessary bloat. So I'm going to create a public interface iEvent handler with one generic parameter tEvent, with a constraint being that tEvent has to implement iEvent, and it'll have a simple method called handle tEvent event. And no, I don't want to make this covariant. So There we have it, our event handler. So how do we actually use this interface? Well, let's write some client code first. Instead of just having a game manager, I don't really like the game manager. Game manager is blah. We'll still have a game manager, but I don't want all this code in here. I want to move out all of the code that has to do with logging in and registering into its own game object, and I want to move out all the code that has to do with handling the lobby into its own game object. So let's see what that would look like. Let's start with, because we're working on event handlers, let's start with the lobby game object. So I'm going to create a lobby go. Go is a suffix that I commonly use for game objects, or mono behaviors rather, and I'm going to add go to the abbreviation list so ReSharper stops freaking out. Now a lobby is going to handle a few different events. A lobby needs to handle our join lobby event, our session join lobby event, our session left lobby event, and our lobby message sent event. So let's do that. He's going to implement join lobby event, session join lobby event, session left lobby event, and lobby message sent event. So that looks pretty sexy, I would say, as far as the API goes. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to say debug dot, wrong debug, give me Unity's debug, debug.log lob, log join lobby event handled. I'm just going to stub these handles out for now, just so that we can have something to work with and see the result of what happens with our code. Now, a lobby is going to be a game object, so it needs to implement, or it's going to be attached to a game object, so it needs to implement mono behavior. And I also need to take it out of this namespace, although I do believe that Unity is supposed to handle namespaces now. I don't want to get into that in case it fails and I embarrass myself in front of everyone, so I'm going to take it out of the namespace. So, how is our lobby game object going to work? Well, we need a public void start. And we also need, when this is destroyed, does anybody remember the Unity mono behavior destroyed event? I always forget these. I hate the way they did this. It makes me very upset. Overridable function. Look at this, guys. This is hilarious. Overridable functions is what it's called. So, what are you talking about? There is no overridable. They're not even functions. They're methods. Don't tell me they're overridable when they're not. They're just magical methods that just happen to correspond to a particular name. And I hate this. So where do we need to? I always forget. On destroy. There we go. And what do you take? Nothing. Good. Okay, so we need a start and an on destroy. Now, what's start and on destroy going to do? It's going to say network manager, and then we're going to say instance dot register event handler this, and unregister event handler this. So this is what I want my API to look like. Does this make sense to everyone? As far as, again, I like writing the API, the code that would consume an API first before I actually write the API, because it gives you a very good perspective about how you're going to be using the code. So is everybody getting a good feel for how this particular object will fit into our ecosystem? Anyone? Okay. So when this starts up, we register it. When it destroys, we unregister it. And then when the server sends any of these events, we handle them. So now let's go ahead and write the code that'll actually make this work. I'm going to go ahead and generate the register event handler. It's going to take in an object, event handlers, and then I'm going to implement that object, event handlers. So the register event handlers and unregister event handlers just takes in an object. Where am I going to move it? I'm going to move it right there. So register event handler, unregister event handler. So what we need to do is we need to take this object, we need to find out what interfaces it implements, extract out all of the different things, find their corresponding methods, and then add them to a dictionary that will be used to pass along an event into that handler. So let's start with the data type that we're going to be needing for this. We're going to need a dictionary of type, and how about a tuple of, oh, I don't have tuples, do I? Yeah. Tuples were introduced in .NET 4. And I'm too lazy to write one. So instead I'm going to write a private class called event handler registration. Event handler registration is going to take in an object handler and a method info method. I'll get to performance concerns after I write this code. So if anybody's just waiting for me to talk about that, I'll get to that. Okay, so this will be the dictionary that we'll be using to keep track of our event handlers. It's going to be of type, which is going to be the event type, and then it's going to have a list of event handler registrations, which are individual methods that need to be invoked. So I need to go ahead and instantiate this. So I instantiated it. And then I need to go ahead and fill this out for our register event handler and unregister event handler. This is actually a little bit simpler, or a lot simpler than you guys might think this would be. All I need to do is say for each var interface in event handlers dot get type dot get interfaces, which returns all the interfaces that are implemented. And then what I need to do is I need to say if inner dot, or if not inner, is generic type. So if it's not a generic type, and enter does not equal type of, actually what I can do right here, I can just say, no, sorry, is generic type, and inner dot get generic type definition does not equal type of I event handler, then continue, then extract the event type, which is going to be enter dot get generic arguments at 0. And then I can say event handler registration dot add. The type is event type, and the event handler registration is going to be a new instantiation. Derp. It's a list. Blah 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 blah. Drag value. You can type out handlers equals event at event type equals new list of that. Handlers add new handler is going to be event handlers. The method info is going to simply be enter get methods, binding flags instance, binding flags public at 0. I can go ahead and just make this code a little bit more straightforward. I can extract this. There we go. So what's going on here isn't actually all that scary. All we're doing is we're looping through all of the interfaces that this particular object implements. Then we're doing something weird. Now, if you guys are not aware, there is one instance inside of the entire C# language where this syntax is valid. And when I say this syntax, I mean we are referencing what's referred to as an open generic or an open type. And an open type is a type that does not have its type parameters applied to it. So as we see here, we're not applying any type parameters to our event handler. So this is an open type. When we get the type, so let's say we have a class that implements event handler of login event. What's going to happen is this interface type right here is not event handler. That's important to keep in mind. Enter does not equal event handler. Enter is actually event handler of type login event. Because of the way the CLR works with generics, this type is actually the type of its generic type with its generic type parameters applied to it. So what we're looking at is an event handler of login event, not an event handler. So what we need to do is we need to extract the type of this generic type without its type parameters applied to it so that we can test to see if it's an event handler. To do that, we invoke the get generic type definition, which gives you the type object that represents the open type. However, this method will throw an exception if we're not looking at a generic type. That's why I have to also check to see if it's generic type first. Somebody says something about speed. It's faster to not make those calls in the first place if they're not valid to be called for a virtual type. Almost all invocations in IL are virtual because of the way the CLR works anyway. Not to mention that it's not like it would be any slower than what Unity does now. Now my theory is that Unity uses some sort of code compilation to wire up to actually compile a straight up invocation of the method. Because that's what I would do. And which means that there would be no performance degradation if Unity's mono behaviors had virtual methods instead of their stupid magical named blah things. Anyway, words and stuff. So getting back to this, what we're looking at is a way to extract the generic type definition from an interface that we're implementing. However, now that we've established that we're looking at an interface of type event handler, we now need to get the actual type argument out of it to find out what event this is actually representing. To do that, we just say get generic arguments, which returns an array of types, and we get the first argument out of that, which will be, in this case, login event. Once we've done that, everything is straightforward from that point on. We check to see if there's already a list of handlers for this event type. If there isn't, we create one, and then we extract the method info that we need to invoke, and then we add it to our list. Now, unregistering is going to be a little bit nastier. There's a few ways that we can do this. I'm just going to go for the brute force way, and I'm going to talk about why I'm doing, or mainly in the interest of time. I'll talk about this in a second. Array if handler dot handler equals event handlers, then event item dot remove handler. Actually, what am I doing? I can just do event item dot remove remove all handler equals event handlers. There we go. Again, brute force. We're just looping through all the event handlers, and if an event handler is the same object of the thing we're trying to unregister, then just remove it. Okay, so now that we've done that, this should just all magically work. No, it won't work yet, because we're actually we have everything up to the point where we actually perform the event dispatch. So I'm going to jump down to my onEvent, which, if you recall, is the method that Photon invokes when the server informs the client that something needs to happen. And instead of doing GameManager.instance.publishEvent, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say list of event handlers. or event handler registration. If not, event handler registration, try get value, event, I'm going to extract the type of the event out into this, so I'm going to say var event type, and I'm going to say try get value event type out handlers return for each var handler and handlers handler.method.invoke, passing in handler, so many handlers, new object array, passing in the event. What do you want? Possible null assignment. Shut up. Fine. Actually, no. This can't return null. I don't think it can be. Whatever, I'll make sure it can't return null by telling it to throw an exception if you can't find it. There we go. Now ReSharper is lying to me because there's no way that this can ever be null. Okay, so what we're looking at is a very straightforward bit of code. We extract out the type of the event. We then attempt to get any event handler registrations that are registered for this event type. If we can't find any, we return. Otherwise, we loop through all of them and use reflection to invoke their method. So the last thing I need to do is go into Game Manager, and when I join the lobby, I want to instantiate a lobby game object. So there's a few ways that I can do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, well, first of all, I'm going to delete all that code because it's no longer needed. Wait, I don't need to do anything in publish right now. I'm going to go ahead and after we've logged in or after we've registered, I'm going to instantiate a new lobby game object. So to do that, I need to create a new game object, and then, you're going to be a little, nah. So I just instantiate a new game object and add a component to it. And then I'm going to do the same thing once we finish registration. I am going to be fixing up this code in a little bit, but for now, that should be fine. So now let's see what happens when we run. So if I log in, so Nelson, actually, hold on, let me do a build first, because you can't do a build when it's running, so that's why I always do the built one first, and then do the other one. Nelson 2 at 3buzz.com, test, login, we're logged in. Nelson 10 at 3dbuzz.com, test, login. Now let's check our console and see what happens. Here, check that out. Lobby message sent event handled. So you guys see that? That proves that our stuff is actually working. So that's cool. Okay, so that means that our lobby game object is actually working. We're registering our event handlers. We're unregistering our event handlers properly. There's one more problem with our code, and that's because when we join the lobby, if you look at the succession of events that are fired, order becomes very important. So when we go ahead and actually join the lobby, we first receive a join lobby event. So we can't actually handle the join lobby event inside of the lobby event or the lobby game object. The reason we can't is because we don't necessarily know to create the lobby game object until we've joined the lobby. Now I've kind of skirted around that issue by coupling the creation of the lobby game object with the concept of registering or logging in, but I don't like that. So when I get back, I'm going to go ahead and step outside for a moment, but when I get back, what I'm going to do is write the code in such a way that the game manager itself will handle the first event that constitutes being in the lobby, which is the join lobby event, which will then create the lobby game object, and then it'll handle all the subsequent events properly. After that, I'm going to pretty much wrap things up by taking the game manager and turning the game manager into sort of event handler orchestrator. All it's going to do is it's going to handle events and decide which game objects need to be active. So do we need to be logging in and registering right now? Do we need to be in the lobby? Do we need to be in the game? And so on. And then I'm going to move all of this logic for logging in and registering into its own game object. So that'll clean up our client code substantially. Alrighty, so I'm going to go ahead and pause the video and I will be back. And we're back. So a question did come in. There was a concern about the order in which our responses come in versus our events. So what I mean by that is inside of our register handler, for example, we don't actually send the register response before we send the lobby joined event. For now, that's not going to cause a problem. And because it's not going to cause a problem, I'm not going to worry about it. There are plenty of problems to worry about now, so I don't want to bloat our code as more than we have to, again, in the spirit of the way that I'm developing this. However, if it were to cause a problem, which I'm sure it will eventually, what you would do is you would introduce a unit of work pattern where the publish for events that are fired as a result of a command being executed, you would want to queue all of these events and then send them after sending the operation response. And then that's essentially a unit of work. Another benefit of that pattern is that if an exception were to happen between us joining the lobby and us setting the response, then we could completely discard that entire unit of work and not send those events, which could potentially be poisonous, back to the client. However, again, like I said, because it's not going to cause a problem yet, I'm not going to worry about it yet, if that makes sense. So jumping back into the Unity project, what I want to do is I don't want to have us switch over to the lobby game object in these particular cases. When the lobby joined event comes in, at that point I want to instantiate the lobby game object and have it register itself and all that fun stuff. So in the interest of that, I'm going to delete this code and I'm going to turn a game manager into an event handler. And to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to implement iEvent handler of type lobby or join lobby event. And when we handle a join lobby event, I want to instantiate the lobby game object so that it can start processing information or subsequent events. So because I've added an event handler to this game object, I need to register it with my network manager. And to do that, all I have to do is say network manager.instance.register event handler this, and then public void on destroy network manager instance unregister event handler this. So that's all we have to do in order to handle this join lobby event. Then when the join lobby event comes in, I need to do two things. I need to go ahead and instantiate the game object for my lobby. I'm going to call it lobby. I need to add the component for my lobby game object. And then I need to tell that component that, well, what I need to do is I need to loop over each one of my join, because if you recall, this event contains the existing sessions. So what I'm going to do is, instead of having the lobby game object itself handle the lobby joined event, I'm going to do that processing in the game manager. So I'm going to say add session. And then I'm going to implement that method. And now we have an add session. So now that I have that going on, what I want to do in the lobby game object is I want to... Actually, I don't want to do anything yet. Besides, I want to remove the event handler for lobby joined event, because that's never going to be handled, ever. Because the lobby joined event is what triggers this game object to be instantiated in the first place. It's never going to receive the event that triggered its instantiation, because that event handler has already been fired. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to, like I said before, I'm going to move all of the registration and logging in stuff, and I'm going to move it into its own game object. So I'm going to create a login game object, which take out the namespace reference, bring that down, have it inherit from mono behavior, and then I'm going to basically copy my, I'm going to delete display username just because that's not used anywhere. I'm going to copy, well, I'm going to create my own state machine here. Let's go ahead and get this side by side so you guys can see what I'm doing here. I'm going to create a state machine here. I'm going to say enum login state, and the state is going to be form sending error. Those are the only states I'm going to need to handle. I'm going to need my register email, register password, login email, login password, and error. So I'm going to need all of these, except for my username. Or, I mean, I don't think I need my username. So, those are my fields that I need. Now I need to initialize these fields. Then I need one more field to do my state, so private login state. I'm going to initialize my state to form, so that we're displaying the form. Then I'm going to delete my game manager state enumeration, delete my message enumeration, my game state enumeration, and my messages enumeration. Because all of that stuff is going to be handled by my lobby game object once I implement that. So then I don't need all this initialization code. All I need is what's already here. I still need my handle. I don't need an update, and I don't need an on GUI. I'm just going to take this entire on GUI, and I'm going to cut it, and I'm going to paste it over here. So there's my login form. A few things I need to clean up is, I did use my username, didn't I? But I didn't call it register username. Let me change this to register username and add a field. So private string register username. Move it up just so we get some consistency there. And initialize it to empty string. Then what do I need to do? I need to go ahead and, instead of doing game manager state, I need to do login state. I no longer have a logged in state, so I'm going to remove this entirely from my on GUI. Then, all I need to do at this point is implement my register and login methods, which are actually already implemented. They're in the game manager. So I'm just going to move them from the game manager into the lobby, or into the login game manager. I'm going to bring in some references. Then I'm going to change this to login state because it's no longer called game manager state. I'm going to remove the reference to display username. In fact, I don't need any of this code except for the error code. So I'm going to invert this if statement, and then I'm going to delete the else branch, and then I'm going to paste in my login state. And let's go ahead and invert the if again. Then I'm basically going to do this for both logging in and registering. So if there's no error, simply return. Otherwise, set the state to error and set the error to what was returned by the server. So now if we look at, and then I can delete the send lobby message method out of my game manager. So now if we look at our game manager has been significantly reduced in complexity. And our login game object is now very straightforward. It displays a form, and it sends commands to the server, and that's it. It doesn't care about when it gets instantiated and when it gets destroyed. That's the responsibility of the game manager. So in the spirit of that, I'm going to go ahead and instantiate the login game object and destroy it properly. So I'm going to have a private game object, login game object. I'm going to instantiate it. I'm going to add a component to it, which is my login go. I'm going to give it a name of login. And then when we handle our join lobby event, I'm going to destroy it. What's the destroy method again? Is it gameObject.destroy? Yeah. Which I can just do destroy because that's redundant. So as you see now, our game manager is now only responsible for deciding which other game objects gets instantiated. So when we start up, we have our login game object instantiated and ran. And then when we get our join lobby event, we destroy our login game object, and then we create a lobby game object. So now, let's see if this actually worked. And it doesn't. Huh. Let's see what happened. Object reference not set to an instance of an object, game manager line 21. Oh, come on. Hold on. Unity's throwing a fit like usual. There we go. Now I have two of these loaded at the same time. That's wonderful. Thank you, Unity. That's just what I wanted. Okay, so what line was it again? 21. We have a null reference exception on line 21. Because network manager.instance is null. The network manager isn't being... The game manager is being instantiated before the network manager is being instantiated. So what I want to do, in order to control which order the network manager is brought in, let's see what we can do here. I'm going to go back into Unity. I'm going to remove the responsibility, or actually, can I just move it up? Yeah, there we go. That's fine. That'll work. Or not. Okay, so let's fix this. I'm going to remove the responsibility of instantiating the network manager. In fact, you know what? I'm going to make the network manager not even a game object. So I'm going to... I don't want the network manager to be a game object. So I'm going to remove component network manager. I'm going to jump back into my network manager code. It's no longer going to inherit from mono behavior. Its start method will become a constructor, and it'll be made private. By doing that, I can now make all these read-only. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this into a true actual singleton class. The first time you access the instance property, I'm going to instantiate the network manager. So as simple as that. So I'm going to do private static network manager instance. The get method is simply going to do return instance null coalescing on instance equals new network manager. Okay, so we still have an error somewhere. Instance equals this, so I can delete all of this code now that instance is being handled elsewhere. And I have a warning down here. The warning is... Oh, never mind. I don't care about that warning. Okay, so there's a new network manager. It's no longer a game object. And because of that, I'm going to adjust namespaces on this, and I'm going to stick it inside of the appropriate namespace, because now it's no longer a game object. So now the instantiation of the game object, or the network manager, will happen right here, and it'll be a lot more consistent, and we won't have to rely on the way Unity works. So hey, there's our stuff. And does it work? I don't know. It just says sending. Sending. Alright, let's figure this out. So all it does is say sending. Oh. You know what I forgot? Network Manager did kind of have to be a game object because it needed to be updated on the main thread. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take these two things and I'm going to move their responsibility into the game manager. Seems like a sensible place to put that responsibility. So network manager.instance.update and then network manager instance on application quit. I just want to get this done. I want to get all of this refactoring done in this session, so I'm making a few slight sacrifices. There we go. So now it looks like it's talking to the server again. So let's go ahead and see if this works. And we're logged in. And we're logged in. And because I don't have any UI for the lobby, nothing happens yet. But we did get a session left lobby event handled debug when I left the lobby. So we know our event handlers are working. And again, I am repeating myself a bit here, but frankly, I don't really care about the game manager a whole lot, and I really don't care about the network manager at all. Because this code, it's only what, 200 lines long. It's if you really want to read through it, it's fairly easy to read. The most important thing to me aren't these classes. The most important thing to me are these classes. To make sure these classes are tight and have their responsibilities well defined and do their job very easily. UI code is not important. Well, when we actually get to the game creation process, this code will be very important to be very clean. Because that's the code that we care about. That's the code we're going to be spending 90% of our time in. You know, very soon here, we're not even going to be touching the network manager anymore. And the game manager, we're only going to be touching for transitions between game states. So that's really about it. So now that we have this all done, I'm going to go ahead and implement the lobby game object. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a private dictionary of lobby session, of uint lobby sessions. This will keep a list of everybody who's currently logged into the lobby. So when we do add session, I'm simply going to say sessions.add session ID session. When we get a session joined lobby event, I'm going to simply say add session event.session. And then when we do a session left lobby event, I'm going to do sessions.remove event.userid. And now we have a collection of everybody who's currently logged into the lobby. So now I'm going to do what we did before. I'm going to create a string list of messages. List string of messages. Instantiate that. And I'm going to do that before I register the event handlers. That seems nicer to me. Private string message. Initialize this to an empty string. And then I'm going to write the GUI, or first I'm going to write the lobby message send event is going to first get the session that sent the message, which I'm going to be able to do by sessions@event.userid. And then I'm going to say messages.add blank said blank session.username event.message. So yeah, this is what's going to be responsible for mapping the ID to a username. So that's how we're going to know who sent what message. Now I'm going to write the onGUI method. OnGUI will do, how about GUI layout.begin horizontal, GUI layout.end horizontal. I'm going to do a scroll view. So to do a scroll view, I need a private vector2 And then I'm going to say that equals GUI layout dot begin scroll view, passing in the current scroll position, and then GUI layout dot end scroll view. Then I'm going to say for each var message in messages, GUI layout label message. And then after the scroll view, I'm going to do message equals, or I'm going to do GUI layout dot begin vertical, GUI layout dot end vertical, message equals GUI layout dot text field message, if GUI layout dot button send lobby message send lobby message will first do network manager dot instance dot dispatch new send lobby message command, passing in the message, and then it's going to blank out this. Actually, I'm going to do this in the UI method. So after we send the lobby message, I'm going to blank out the message, as is pretty typical for chat clients. And then I guess what I can also do is when a session leaves the lobby, I'm going to do messages or our session equals sessions at event user ID messages add lobby session dot username, and then the final thing I'm going to do is someone sent me some code for some reason, and it's taking a long time to load. Yeah, that works too. But for now, we'll be revisiting this UI later. I just want to get it functional so we can challenge other opponents and we can actually build a game. The next thing I want to do is I actually want to begin a horizontal. I want to do this in a vertical. And this is getting ridiculous. Let me clean up this code a little bit by inserting arbitrary blocks to make this code actually semi-readable. I'm going to begin a vertical, and what I'm going to do on the left-hand side is I'm going to begin another scroll view that is going to be used for viewing everybody who's currently in the lobby. So users in lobby scroll position, and say begin scroll view GUI layout dot end scroll view, and then I'm going to say for each var session in sessions GUI layout dot label session dot username, or session dot value dot username. Okay, so that should be a decent enough lobby. Let's see what it looks like. I'm going to go ahead and build out a build so I can have multiple people logged in. Let's start off with the Nelson 2 in a second. There we go. Nelson2 at 3dbuzz.com test. So there's our Nelson 2. Let's do another build. Derp. Hold on. I can run another build, but I need to actually double click on it in Explorer. So RuneSlinger build runeslinger.exe, and because I did that, I totally screwed everything up. Let me do this again. Build faster, go away Unity, and you're broken. Let me delete everything out of that and do a build again. And wow, I seriously broke it. Now what's going on? Somehow I managed to get off the right scene. So sorry about that, I was just on the wrong scene. I don't know why Unity sometimes decides that it wants to look at a different scene, but it does. Unity does whatever it wants to do, honestly. Don't even try to understand it because you're not going to succeed. It's Nelson 5. It's Nelson 10. Hey, look at that. We now have a Nelson 1234 enter the lobby, and I can't exactly send chat messages. Okay, so I can send chat messages to this guy, but I can't send chat messages to the other guy. And I have a theory as to why that is. So let me go ahead and fire this up in the... Okay, object reference not sent to an instance of an object. Given key was not present in the dictionary. So those are the errors that we're getting. See, this one works. I get my Nelson 1, 2, 3, and whoa and hey, and then my messages, although the UI is completely screwed up. I'll fix that in a moment. We're getting two primary errors. We're getting a null reference exception at lobby geo line 36. I know exactly what's happening there. Can anybody guess? Come on. You guys have been watching me code. I introduced a bug that is very common with code like this. Can anybody guess as to why I would get a null reference exception when I join a lobby? Can anybody guess? Think. Okay, well I guess nobody's guessing. The problem is this add session method. Because guess what? Add session requires this dictionary to be instantiated, but this dictionary doesn't become instantiated until start. The reason I do that is because I hate field initializers. I think they look ugly and they introduce some issues. However, I would typically want to do this instantiation inside of a constructor, but that's not going to be possible with the way that Unity works. So I'm going to have to resort to using a field initializer. And the reason why that's happening is if I look at my game manager, I'm creating the login game object, and then or the lobby game object, and then I'm immediately adding the session, but the start method doesn't get invoked. Awake might work. What's the word difference between awake and start? I used to know that, but then I stopped caring. Okay, well, let's try awake then and see what happens. The reason I stopped caring is because I did come up with a significantly easier way to work with game objects involving IOC. But that's going to... I didn't want to do you. I wanted to do the one off screen first. And then I want to do you. And hey, look, it works. Not quite. You know what's happening? It's because trouble typing out emails. We have no email validation all the time. It can be saved logging. Oh, shut up. So let's see. We're getting an error when I send a message. And the reason... So I introduced a bug when I introduced this dispatch method. Remember how I introduced a dispatch method that doesn't take in a action to invoke with the response. Well, what's happening is that's kind of a requirement here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this into a try get, maybe get, or whatever that method is called. I can't think anymore. Let's say action of operation response callback. If command callbacks try get value command ID out response callback, then do this. There we go. That should fix the code. And then somebody says, do the auto scrolling. Sure, let's do auto scrolling. So that what that's going to do is every time a message is sent, I'm going to say message scroll position equals new vector to message scroll position x, and then float dot max value. So that'll make sure it's scrolled all the way to the bottom. Now I need to figure out why my, oh right, because I need to do a GUI layout dot begin horizontal here. Or not, it's still being miserable. But at least I think we're not getting any more exceptions. Then let me fix up the GUI. Okay, so also I'm not constraining, or there we go. There's our scroll view. Ooh, you know what? I got horizontals and verticals mixed up again. I think that's what's going on. Or did I? Login starts of... I did. I'm sorry, guys. Let's go ahead and... No, I do begin a vertical. Because I want a vertical, then I want a... No, I want a horizontal, and then I want verticals. Oh, I hate this so much. You know what? Somebody should write a way to do Unity UIs in such a way that you could use CSS and HTML-like syntax. That would be awesome. Because I absolutely hate this. What am I... See, now I got my braces confused. This is driving me insane. Alrighty, begin horizontal, open curly, end horizontal. Good. Begin vertical, end vertical. Good. Begin horizontal, end horizontal. Good. Begin scroll view, end scroll view. Begin vertical, end vertical. And then I have like one brace too many, I think. No. Consistify this. There you go. And yes, that's a word. Okay, I think that's right. Let's just look at it and see what happens. And I just arrow shook all my windows away. There we go. I hate arrow shake. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. But I'm too lazy to figure out how to turn it off. Okay, close, but not quite. Let's see here. What am I doing wrong? Begin vertical. Do I need to do 2 nested horizontals? You know what? Just, I don't care. I don't care. Just, trying to make this look pretty. Okay. Oh. I don't think that's correct. I have a feeling I got something wrong. I mismatched my... This UI is going to be the end of me. Begin horizontal, end horizontal. And vertical... There we go. I think that's closer to what I want. No, not quite. This is just the GUI, not even game worthy. I know. Just give me one moment. No, I want verticals. What am I... There we go. That's what I want. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, that's good enough. Although I suppose I could do a GUI layout dot width of 500 and a GUI layout width of 300. Okay, I promise that this is the last GUI change I'm going to make. Yeah, at some point, once I actually get... There we go, that looks pretty. Once I get an actual kind of game going, yay! Although this doesn't have to be 300, this can be 150. Once I actually get the game actually working here, I'm going to be covering over, going over like continuous integration, building updates, stuff like that. And then at that point, once I have that set up, I'll be doing that on a live server so that you guys will be able to join in, either on your own clients or a client that's provided. Alrighty, so there's our awesome lobby. Now the way that I'm going to be working on this probably next week is I'm going to be basically turning each one of these sessions into a button. And what that's going to do is that's going to initiate a challenge that the other user will be able to accept, and then that's going to go into the game. So yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I can cover really quickly. Let me go ahead and do a commit real fast. Make sure I've saved everything. Alright. one thing I was struggling with, how the hell do you bind enter key to sending a message and dealing with focus? Like pressing enter seems like it should be simple, probably is, just couldn't find out how to do it. One of the most consistent ways that I've found that works is on GUI. What you could do, so I can say if, and then I can do, I believe it's event.current dot, why is this looking different than what it used to look like? Event.current dot, was it GUI.event? No, I'm pretty sure it was event.current. That's what it used to be, anyway. And then key code equals enter. Actually, no, you want return, because return's the enter key in the middle of your keyboard. The numeric one is the one on the numeric pad. If I'm not mistaken, this should work, if I haven't forgotten, which I may very well have. Yeah, apparently I forgot how to do that. So give me one quick second. Apparently that's how you're supposed to... Oh, ha! Damn you, solution. Sorry about that. Yep, there we go. It works. As far as focus, the easiest way to do that is to, what we can do here is before I render the text field, I can do GUI layout dot, GUI dot set next control name to message, and then I can ensure that it's focused by doing GUI dot focus control message, and that will ensure that message is focused. Now I can go ahead and give the same treatment to the login. So in login, oh, this is going to be a little bit complicated because I actually have two forms right here: login and register. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and say GUI.set next control name register username, register email, register password, login email, and login password. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say is register form focused equals our current control equals GUI dot get name of focus control, current control equals register username, or current control equals register email, or I hate UI code, equals register password. Then is login form focused equals current control equals login email, or current control equals login password. And then I'm going to do is register form focused and GUI dot or event dot current key code equals or return, and then is login form focused and equals return. And then what I'm going to do is, I wonder if this works. I don't know if this works. Let's see if that works. Nope, doesn't work. I don't really care. Or, what I could do is I could simply on the GUI, oops, I want set focus control. Now, does this work? Maybe it does. Nope. Hold on, my Alt tab doesn't work anymore. So what I could do is at the end of this, I could say if current control equals blank, or if string is null or empty current control. GUI focus control login email. And it really doesn't want to focus that email, does it? I probably have a typo somewhere. What is current control? Debug log current control. Let's see what that is. It's message. What? Wait a sec. How is this on GUI getting invoked? It's not. Huh. I guess what's happening is that it's saving the currently focused control between sessions. That doesn't make any sense. Whatever. Anyway, the point is now that I should be able to go in here, hit A, then enter. So, there we go. There's your lesson on focusing. Yeah, focus is awful, especially on the web. Alrighty, so, yeah, how's everyone doing? We're pretty much just done with our lobby. What I want to do probably next week is I'll start with building the game out in a way that isn't actually using any networking stuff. I want to figure out a way to do that, because that's how I actually approached the problem before when I built Rune Game. And then we'll add networking into it. Whoa, there's a small problem. I just found a bug. Okay, I found two bugs. First bug is that the messages doesn't scroll down if a message is added in this way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a private void add message string message, and it's going to say messages.add message, and then it's going to scroll it. Messages scroll pose equals new vector messages scroll pose x float max. And then inside of here, I'm going to change that to use that so that we properly scroll no matter where the message comes from. The second bug, I completely forgot. What was the second bug? Oh yeah, second bug was that it was sending messages even though I hadn't actually typed in anything, because when I held the enter button down, it repeatedly sent out messages. That's going to be problematic. So I'm going to wrap this all in an not string is null or empty message. Yes, and as far as sending your own, well, no, we'll do that next week, because that introduces another problem that I hadn't addressed at the moment. We don't have a reference to a session object of ourself yet. All right, so those two bugs are... No, I'm not going to do that solution. That surpasses what I'm willing to do as far as ugliness. All right, so yeah, I think that's about it. We've been at it for about 2 hours, so I hope people saw some good code being written and stuff. And I'm going to go ahead and do one final commit, make sure that both my solutions are saved and that Unity is saved. And then I'm going to push this off to Git, and we'll wrap things up. So what did I just do? I just added control focus and enter for submitting forms. Alrighty. So, to all you future people, I'll see you guys next week.